Don't worry, sweethearts. Daddy just needs a moment to figure out why the engine stopped responding.
But the sun is going away. Are we still far from Grandma's house?
A blizzard pounds Seattle's outskirts. Ethan Voss, a 38-year-old tech CEO with piercing blue eyes and steady hands, pulls over as his car sensors fail. Then, through the whiteout, a boy's scream cuts the night. "Help! Mama's not moving!" A cracked snow globe lies half-buried beside him, its tiny cabin swirling with frozen hope. Snow slashed sideways across the highway, erasing everything beyond Ethan Voss's headlights. The world outside his SUV had turned white and formless. No horizon, no sky, just chaos. He had built Neurosentry AI to predict storms like this, to save lives when nature refused to show mercy. Yet tonight, his own system had gone dark. The sensors failed, the network dropped, and the storm's fury made even his technology small. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed behind his glasses, scanning for any sign of a turnoff. That's when he heard it. A sound not made by wind or engine, something human. A child's scream. He froze. It was faint, warped by distance but unmistakable. "Help! Mama's not moving!" Ethan's pulse spiked. He threw the SUV into park, the tires sinking into slush. The wind punched him as he opened the door, slicing through his coat like knives. "Hello?" he shouted into the blizzard. "Where are you?" No answer, only wind. Then a smaller, breaking voice. "Over here!" He followed the sound, stumbling through drifts until the beam of his phone flashlight caught metal. A car, half-buried nose first in a ditch. Its windows were iced over, one rear tire still spinning helplessly. Kneeling beside the wreck was a boy, no older than 6, his face red and raw from the cold, tiny hands clutching a woman's limp arm through the broken glass. Ethan's throat tightened. Hey, it's okay," he said, crouching low. "I'm here to help." The boy turned, tears freezing on his lashes. "She won't wake up. I tried." Ethan yanked his gloves off and checked the woman's neck. Her pulse fluttered weakly under his fingertips. Barely there, but there. "She's alive," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "We need to get her warm." He scooped the boy up first, wrapping him in his coat before returning for the woman. The car's interior reeked of gasoline and cold metal. Her seatbelt was jammed. He braced a shoulder against it, ripped it free, and lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and her hair was stiff with frost. Back in the SUV, he shoved the heat to full blast and cranked the defrosters. "What's your name?" he asked the boy, who sat shivering beside him. "Noah," came the small reply. "That's my mom." "Okay, Noah. I'm Ethan. Your mom's going to be okay. You hear me?" He didn't know if that was true, but saying it made the world steadier. The woman's lips were blue, her breathing shallow. Ethan grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The line crackled with interference. "Emergency dispatch, what's your location?" He glanced out at the swirling void. "Highway 2, east of Monroe. Mile marker 43, I think. Single vehicle accident. Adult female, unresponsive but breathing. Hypothermic. I've got a child with her." "Copy that. Stay with them. EMS is en route, but roads are nearly impassable." "How long?" 15, maybe 20 minutes, sir." Ethan's chest constricted. In this weather, 20 minutes could mean everything. He turned to Noah. The boy was hugging something tight against his chest. A cracked snow globe, the kind you'd find in a gas station gift shop. Inside, a tiny wooden cabin sat under swirling flecks of fake snow. "Your mom's going to need that kind of cabin right now," Ethan murmured, forcing a smile. Noah looked up, voice trembling. "It's our home. Grandma gave it to us. Said it keeps our home safe, even if we lose it." Ethan felt something twist deep inside him. He watched the flakes settle around that tiny cabin, the same way snow now swallowed the real one outside. He reached forward, brushing a strand of frozen hair from the woman's cheek. Her pulse fluttered again, fragile but persistent. "Come on," he whispered, almost to himself. "Don't give up." Outside, sirens were still far away. muted ghosts in the storm. Inside the SUV, the heater roared, fogging the windows with the first hint of warmth. Ethan wrapped his scarf around the woman's neck, tucking it beneath her chin, and held the boy closer. For the first time in years, something cracked open inside him, an instinct older than technology, older than control. He looked down at his shaking hands, at the snow globe resting between them. The world outside was chaos, but inside that small sphere, and this small car, there was still a chance at life. The storm screamed against the SUV like a living thing. Wind clawed at the windows, snow streaking sideways in thick, relentless waves. Ethan Voss pressed the accelerator gently, trying to keep the vehicle steady on the slick highway shoulder. Every few seconds the tires slipped and caught again, the traction control light flickering like a warning heartbeat. Beside him, 6-year-old Noah clutched the cracked snow globe to his chest. His small hands were white around it, trembling, not just from cold, but from something deeper. Shock. In the passenger seat, the woman, Grace, though he didn't know her name yet, lay reclined beneath Ethan's coat. Her breathing came in shallow, uneven gasps. He kept glancing over, one hand hovering near her wrist to feel the faint pulse that proved she was still fighting. "Talk to me, Noah," he said, keeping his tone even as he guided the SUV through a white abyss. "When did the car stop working?" The boy wiped his nose with the back of his mitten. "Last night. Mom said we'd make it to Everett before the storm got bad, but the car ran out of heat." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And you stayed here all night?" He nodded, eyes down. "We tried to sleep. I kept shaking her, but she wouldn't wake up." Ethan swallowed hard. "You did good, Noah. You stayed with her. That's what mattered." His phone buzzed again, dispatch calling back. He fumbled it onto speaker mode. "Mr. Voss, this is Snohomish County Rescue. What's your status?" "I've got the woman and her son in my vehicle," he said. "She's hypothermic, barely responsive. I'm heading west toward the hospital." "Copy. Closest ER is Swedish Edmonds, but Route 2's nearly closed. If you can make it to Highway 9, meet Unit 17. They're heading your way." "Understood," Ethan said, gripping the wheel tighter. "ETA?" 10 minutes, maybe less if they don't get stuck. Keep her warm. Don't let her lose consciousness." "Trying," he muttered, ending the call. From the back seat came a soft moan. Grace stirred slightly, her head rolling toward the sound of Noah's voice. Ethan leaned closer, pulse kicking. "Grace, can you hear me?" he asked, even though she hadn't yet told him her name. Her eyelids fluttered. "And Noah?" "I'm right here, Mom," the boy whispered, his small body leaning forward as if words could warm her. Ethan adjusted the heater vent toward her face, watching the color slowly return, barely perceptible, but there. He'd seen patients like this before in the early prototypes of Neurosentry's field med drones, those whose bodies fought against cold even as their minds drifted away. "You hang on," he said softly, more to himself than her. "Help's coming." He turned onto Highway 9. Snowdrifts towered like frozen walls on either side. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, smearing streaks of ice instead of clearing them. Then, through the static of the storm, a faint glow appeared, a red strobe cutting through white. Emergency lights. Ethan exhaled shakily. "We've got them," he said aloud. When the rescue truck pulled alongside, 2 EMTs waded through the wind, their reflective jackets glowing like ghosts. Ethan threw the SUV into park and jumped out, snow swallowing him to the knees. "She's in the passenger seat," he shouted. "Severe hypothermia, weak pulse." The medics moved fast, transferring her onto a stretcher wrapped in thermal blankets. One of them turned to Ethan. "She's lucky you found them when you did. Another hour, and—" He didn't finish the sentence. Noah's small voice cut through. "Can I go with her?" The medic hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "I'll bring him," Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for question. "I'm right behind you." The medic nodded and rushed back toward the ambulance, snow swirling in his wake. Ethan knelt in the snow beside Noah, meeting his wide, frightened eyes. "Hey, we're not done yet. You did everything right, okay? You kept her alive." The boy sniffled. "Will she be okay?" Ethan hesitated, feeling the weight of that small, desperate question. He wasn't used to promises, especially not ones that could break, but something in the boy's voice left him no choice. "She will," he said quietly, "because we're going to make sure of it." He helped Noah into the SUV, brushing the snow off his small boots before closing the door. The cracked snow globe sat on the dashboard now, light from the emergency flashers glinting off the fractured glass. Inside, the tiny cabin still stood, snow frozen mid-fall, like hope suspended in glass. As Ethan followed the ambulance through the storm, the road behind them disappeared completely, buried under another wave of white. He didn't know why he couldn't stop glancing at that snow globe, or why it felt like the universe had just placed something fragile and irreplaceable in his hands. What he did know, as the hospital lights finally appeared through the storm's veil, was this. He hadn't just rescued a stranger. Something about tonight, this boy, this mother, had already started to rescue him too. The ambulance siren sliced through the storm, echoing off the snow-choked highway. Ethan followed close behind, his SUV's headlights barely cutting through the white blur. The wipers squealed over the glass, the heater roaring, but still the cold crept in, as if the night itself refused to let go. Noah sat in the passenger seat wrapped in Ethan's coat, his head barely reaching the window. The boy's small fingers still clutched the cracked snow globe, the swirling flakes catching stray flashes of red from the ambulance ahead. Ethan kept glancing between the boy and the road, his jaw set. "Your mom's strong," Ethan said, voice low but steady. "She's fighting." Noah nodded weakly. "She always says we don't quit, even when it's hard." Ethan looked at the boy for a second longer than he should have. There was something in his tone, something that hit too close. He remembered another storm, years ago, a different highway, another child's voice calling his name before the sound was swallowed by wind. He blinked hard and gripped the wheel tighter. "She's right," he said quietly. "You don't quit." They reached the hospital just as the ambulance's taillights vanished into the loading bay. Ethan swung into a snow-packed space and jumped out, the cold biting his face. The air smelled of diesel and antiseptic. He rounded the car, opened the passenger door, and scooped Noah into his arms. Inside the ER, fluorescent light replaced the night's chaos. The smell of iodine hit first, sharp and clean. Nurses rushed the gurney past, Grace's face pale beneath an oxygen mask. Ethan trailed them until a nurse blocked his path. "Sir, we've got her from here." He nodded, still catching his breath. "The boy, he's with her. I'll wait." "Are you a relative?" she asked, already scanning a clipboard. Ethan hesitated. "No, just someone who couldn't drive by." The nurse studied him, his snow-soaked suit, his trembling hands, and softened. "Then sit tight, sir. We'll update you soon." Ethan found an empty chair in the waiting area, lowering Noah gently beside him. The boy's face was drained, his lashes clumped with melted snow. He leaned against Ethan's arm without asking, eyes fixed on the double doors that had swallowed his mother. The minutes stretched thin. A doctor's voice called out codes in clipped tones. A stretcher rolled past, wheels squealing over tile. Every sound echoed too loudly. Noah's voice broke the silence. "You think she'll wake up?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think she's got too much to do to stop now." The boy tilted his head, studying him with that strange child's wisdom that always cut too deep. "You sound like you know." Ethan stared at the floor. "I lost someone once," he said after a beat. "A long time ago, but sometimes helping someone else stay alive helps you too." Noah nodded slowly, then opened his small palm. "You can hold it," he said, offering the snow globe. Ethan hesitated, then took it carefully. The glass was cold, cracked diagonally through the middle, but when he turned it, the flakes swirled anyway. Inside, the tiny cabin glowed faintly under the hospital's overhead light. "What's inside?" Ethan asked quietly. "Our house," Noah said, "before we lost it. Grandma said if we kept this, we'd never really lose home, even if everything else was gone." Ethan swallowed hard. "Smart woman." "She's gone too," Noah whispered. "But Mom says her voice is still in there somewhere." Ethan stared at the globe again. His reflection wavered in the glass. A tired man in a designer suit, snow melting on his shoulders. Behind him, a boy clutching Faith in miniature form. The nurse reappeared at last. "Sir, Ma'am's stable. We've got her warming and fluids going. It'll be a few hours before we know the full picture." Ethan stood, relief flooding his chest. "She's going to make it?" The nurse nodded. "She's lucky you found them when you did. Another hour in that cold." She didn't finish. He turned back to Noah. "You hear that? She's going to be okay." The boy smiled faintly for the first time that night, a crack of sunlight through gray. "Can I see her?" "Soon," the nurse said. "Let's give her a bit of time." As the nurse walked away, Noah leaned his head against Ethan's arm again, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Within minutes he was asleep, still holding the snow globe in both hands. Ethan sat perfectly still, afraid to move and break the fragile piece. His own reflection stared back at him from the dark window. The CEO who'd spent a decade designing systems to protect people from storms, yet hadn't felt human warmth in years. For the first time in a long while, the titles and awards meant nothing. Tonight, there was only a boy, a broken snow globe, and the faint hum of machines keeping a stranger alive in a hospital room he couldn't leave. And beneath all that cold, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, something warmer than the heater ever could. The automatic doors hissed open and shut as nurses hurried through with trays, their sneakers squeaking on tile. The air inside Swedish Edmunds Hospital was overheated, dry, and humming with the sound of machines keeping lives steady. Ethan Voss sat in the far corner of the waiting room, elbows on his knees, coat half dry now, but his pulse still tight with cold. Across from him, Noah slept curled up under a hospital blanket one of the nurses had found. The cracked snow globe rested on the chair beside him, fogged from the warmth of his hands. Every few minutes Ethan's eyes went to it, to the tiny cabin, to the crooked crack through the glass, because it reminded him that everything fragile still deserved care. He rubbed his eyes. He hadn't felt this powerless in years. Not since the night his company's first drone prototype failed in testing, and a rescue mission came too late to save a child caught in a blizzard. He'd built Neurosentry to stop that from happening again, to create precision where chaos reigned. And yet, here he was, surrounded by sterile light and uncertainty, praying for one woman he didn't even know. A nurse appeared. "Mr. Voss?" He stood fast. "Yes." "She's stable. You can see her for a minute, but only one visitor at a time." Ethan looked to Noah, still asleep. "He needs rest. I'll go." The nurse nodded and led him down a narrow hallway. The smell of disinfectant thickened, mixed with something faintly metallic. Monitors beeped softly in distant rooms. When he stepped inside, Grace looked impossibly small beneath the white sheets. Her hair, still damp from melted snow, clung to her temples. A thin line of color had returned to her cheeks, but her lips were still pale. An IV dripped steadily beside her. Ethan pulled a chair to the bedside. For a moment he didn't speak. He just watched the slow rise and fall of her chest and tried to make sense of the knot in his throat. Finally, he said quietly, "You made it." Her eyelids fluttered. Then slowly she turned her head toward his voice. "You're the man from the storm." "Ethan Voss," he said. "You and your son were lucky. The storm was unforgiving," she finished weakly. "I know." Her voice rasped, but her eyes, gray-green, sharp despite exhaustion, studied him as though trying to place him. "Is Noah—" "He's sleeping. Warm, safe." Relief trembled through her face. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I didn't think we'd make it. The car heater died before midnight. He kept saying it was fine, but I knew he was freezing." Ethan leaned forward. You kept him alive. That's what matters. Her fingers twitched on the blanket. You risked a lot stopping in that storm. Most people wouldn't. I couldn't drive by. His tone came out rougher than he meant. Grace gave a faint smile. Then, thank you, for my son. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything. The nurse poked her head in. Ms. Miller, rest now. Your vitals look better, but we'll keep you under observation tonight. When she left, silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Ethan glanced at the chart at the foot of the bed. Grace Miller, 29. The name tugged at something, but he couldn't place it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the snow globe. This belongs to Noah. He didn't want to let it go, but I thought you might like to see it. Her eyes softened instantly. My mother gave him that before she passed. She said, home isn't walls, it's the people who hold you when the wind comes. Ethan turned the globe in his hand, flakes swirling in slow motion. Then he held on to the right thing. When he set it on the nightstand, Grace's gaze lingered on it, and then on him. You're shaking, she said. He gave a small, tired laugh. Guess I forgot I was human for a while. Grace closed her eyes briefly. You have a kind face for someone who sounds like he lives inside computers. He raised an eyebrow. You can tell. I used to work with them, she murmured, at a lab in Redmond. Biomedical research before the funding vanished. Something twisted in his gut. Redmond. She nodded, already drifting toward sleep. We were working on neural response mapping. The sponsor pulled out after a merger. I lost my job, and everything unraveled after that. Ethan's hand tightened around the arm of the chair. NeuroSentry Technologies, 2019. Acquisition Phase 1. The merger she mentioned wasn't random. It had been his company, his decision. He sat there long after she drifted off, the hum of the machines loud in his ears. The guilt spread slow, heavy, like thawing ice. In the hallway, Noah stirred awake and rubbed his eyes. When Ethan returned, the boy looked up anxiously. Is Mom okay? She's resting. You can see her in the morning. Noah nodded, fighting another yawn. Can we stay here tonight? Ethan looked at the row of plastic chairs, then at the vending machine's dull glow. We'll figure something out, he said, draping his coat back over the boy. When Noah curled up again, the snow globe sat balanced between them on the armrest, its cracked glass catching the hospital's white light. Inside, the flakes floated in slow circles, never landing, never melting. Ethan watched them spin until his eyes blurred. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or shareholders or quarterly forecasts. He was thinking about a woman he'd nearly destroyed without knowing it, and the child now asleep at his side. He leaned back, exhaled, and whispered to the dark window, I'm sorry. The morning light over Seattle was a pale, exhausted gray, bleeding weakly through the hospital blinds. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world outside wrapped in quiet frost. Inside the small recovery room, the hum of machines blended with the soft rhythm of breathing. Ethan sat slouched in a plastic chair near the window, jacket draped over his shoulders, the snow globe resting on the table beside him. Noah still slept in a bundled heap on the cot the nurses had wheeled in, one arm dangling off the side, his small hand curled toward the globe as if reaching for it even in dreams. Grace stirred first. Her eyelids fluttered open to a world of soft light and antiseptic air. The first thing she saw was Ethan, his profile turned toward the window, blue eyes distant, the faint stubble on his jaw catching the morning glow. You stayed, she said, voice hoarse. He turned, startled, then smiled faintly. Couldn't exactly leave you two in a snowstorm. Grace tried to sit up, wincing at the pull of the IV. You didn't have to stay overnight. Ethan stood, adjusting her pillow. Hospitals are terrible places to wake up alone. Something in the way he said it made her pause. You've done this before, she said quietly. Stayed for someone. He hesitated, gaze dropping. Once, a long time ago. She studied him, but he didn't elaborate. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with the kind of understanding that only strangers with shared scars can recognize. The door opened, and a nurse entered, smiling. "Good morning, Ms. Miller. You gave us quite a scare. Temperature's back to normal, but you need rest and nutrition. We'll start you on soft food soon." Grace nodded, though her eyes flicked toward Noah. "And my son?" "He's fine," the nurse said. "Brave kid. Wouldn't let go of that snow globe all night." When she left, Grace exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Ethan. "I can't even imagine what would have—" He cut her off gently. "Don't. You don't owe me anything." Her gaze lingered on him. "People don't usually stop in storms like that." "I wasn't always the kind who did," he said softly. "Maybe I needed to remember how." Noah stirred, blinking awake. The moment his eyes found his mother sitting up, color bloomed back into his small face. "Mom!" Grace reached for him, her hand trembling. He scrambled up and climbed into the bed, burying his face against her shoulder. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered into his hair. "We're okay." Ethan turned away, giving them privacy, but her next words stopped him. "Mr. Voss?" He turned back. "Ethan," he corrected. "Ethan," she repeated, testing it softly, like the first sound of warmth after too much cold. "You saved our lives. At least let me buy you breakfast when I'm out of here." He smiled. "Deal, if you let me pick the place." They both laughed, small, tired laughs that somehow filled the room more than the machine's hum. A few hours later, a doctor in a Navy scrub top entered with a clipboard. "Ms. Miller, you'll be discharged tomorrow if everything holds steady. But we'll need to run a few follow-ups. Do you have insurance or a local address?" Grace's shoulders stiffened. We were staying with a friend in Marysville, but she moved out last week. I'll cover it," Ethan interrupted. The doctor blinked. "Sir, that's not necessary." "It is," Ethan said firmly. "Bill it to Neurosentry." Grace turned sharply. You're with Neurosentry?" Ethan froze. He hadn't expected that reaction. "Yeah, I run it." She stared at him, disbelief flashing to recognition. "The same Neurosentry that bought out Northwest Biomedical years ago?" His voice caught before he managed. "Yes." Her lips parted, the color draining from her face. "I worked there. I was a research nurse on the neural mapping team. When your company cut funding, the project was shut down overnight. We lost everything. Jobs, housing. That's how this started." The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan's breath stalled. The doctor, sensing the shift, excused himself quietly, leaving them in silence. Grace turned her face toward the window, her voice trembling. "I used to believe in what we were doing. I thought we were helping people. But when the merger happened, we weren't numbers anymore. We were just cost reductions." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." She looked back at him then, eyes raw but steady. "People like you never do." The truth stung, because she wasn't wrong. He'd signed a dozen memos that year with the same logic. Streamline, optimize, preserve the core. He'd told himself he was saving the company, never asking what it cost others. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words small but real. "If I'd known—" Grace shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. You saved us. That's enough." But her tone said it wasn't. Not really. Later, as dusk fell again and hospital lights clicked on, Ethan sat alone in the corridor, hands clasped. Through the glass panel of her door, he could see Grace sleeping, Noah curled beside her, both breathing evenly. He'd spent a lifetime building systems that could predict disaster, but tonight, the only equation he couldn't solve was guilt. He looked at the snow globe sitting beside him, its glass cracked but still intact. Inside, the tiny cabin stood warm against the storm. He turned it gently, watching the flakes fall. He made a silent promise. To himself, to them. Tomorrow, he'd find a way to make things right. Ethan didn't leave the hospital that night. He couldn't. Not after what Grace had said. Her words kept replaying, clear as the wind that had howled through the storm. "People like you never do." He sat in the corridor outside her room, elbows on his knees, the cracked snow globe turning slowly between his palms. Each time he shook it, the flakes drifted lazily around the tiny cabin, a world that stayed whole even when the glass was fractured. When he'd first started Neurosentry, he'd promised himself that saving lives through AI would mean something. But looking at Grace, someone whose world had collapsed because of a line in one of his merger reports, he realized the truth. He'd been saving systems, not people. The overhead lights dimmed automatically for the night shift. Nurses moved quietly through the hall, checking vitals, adjusting blankets. Ethan stood, stretching stiff legs, and stepped into Grace's room. She was sleeping now, her hand resting protectively over Noah's small one. The boy had dozed off beside her, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, feeling an ache in his chest he couldn't name. He adjusted the edge of the blanket that had slipped from Noah's shoulder. Grace murmured in her sleep, but didn't wake. When he turned to go, the doctor caught him near the nurse's station. "Mr. Voss, you'll want to know, her insurance application was denied. She's flagged as no fixed residence. Hospital policy means she can stay one more night, maybe two, then social services steps in." Ethan frowned. "You're saying she could lose custody?" The doctor hesitated. "If they can't verify a stable address, yes, but I'll hold off as long as I can." Ethan's hands tightened. "Thank you, doctor. I'll handle it." When morning came, he'd already made calls, quietly, efficiently. A temporary hotel suite under his company's name, grocery cards, a discreet nurse check-in plan. By the time Grace woke, color returning to her face, he was there, leaning against the windowsill with the 2 cups of coffee. "Morning," he said. She blinked. "You're still here?" "I tend to finish what I start," he said with a faint smile, handing her the cup. She accepted it cautiously. "You didn't have to do all this." "Maybe not," he said, "but I wanted to." Noah stirred, stretching beside her. "Mom, can we go home now?" Grace hesitated. "We don't really have a home yet, honey." Ethan stepped closer. "I've arranged a place, just temporary, until you're steady." Her eyes snapped up. "You didn't—" "It's not charity," he said quickly. "Think of it as me hiring a guardian for that snow globe." Noah's face lit up. "I can do that." Grace let out a breath that trembled between refusal and relief. "You don't know us," she whispered. "Why help?" Ethan looked at the boy's eager smile, then at her tired eyes. "Because I once knew what it was like to lose everything that mattered, and because last night reminded me that not every rescue comes from technology." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Just for a few days." "Agreed," he said. That afternoon, Ethan drove them from the hospital to a small hotel near the waterfront. The roads were clearer now, lined with melting snow that glistened in the sunlight. Noah pressed his forehead to the window, gasping at every fairy horn and seagull cry. Grace watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "You really run Neurosentry?" she asked finally. "Guilty," he said. "I used to believe in that company," she said softly. "We worked on neural mapping for early trauma recovery. Then overnight, everything was gone. I lost my mother's house within months. After that, it was one long storm." Ethan didn't interrupt. Her voice was steady, but every word cut deep. He could picture the emails, cold, efficient, each one signed with his approval. When they reached the hotel, Noah ran ahead, laughing as the automatic doors whooshed open. Grace lingered by the entrance. "Why do I get the feeling this is more than guilt?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's something I forgot how to feel." "Which is?" "Responsibility," he said simply. Inside, the room was warm and bright, overlooking Elliott Bay. Noah leapt onto the bed, holding up the mended snow globe that Ethan had carefully taped overnight. "Look, Mom, it's fixed." Grace turned to Ethan, tears pricking her eyes despite herself. "You really didn't have to." He shrugged. "It deserved another chance." So did she, he thought. As he left them to settle in, he paused by the door. Grace's laughter, small and cautious, followed him into the hallway. It was the kind of sound that reminded him how rare real warmth was in his world. Outside, snow was melting in slow rivulets down the glass, tracing faint silver lines that caught the light. And, for the first time in years, Ethan Voss felt something thaw inside him. The next morning, the city gleamed under a fragile sun. Snow clung to rooftops like frosting, and the air carried that brief, clean stillness Seattle always held right after a storm. In the small hotel room Ethan had arranged, the heater hummed softly. And for the first time in days, Grace slept without shivering. Noah sat at the window, tracing foggy circles on the glass with his fingertip. The mended snow globe rested beside him on the windowsill, light glinting off its crack. When Ethan knocked gently and stepped in, the boy looked up, grinning. "Morning, Mr. Ethan." "Morning, kiddo," Ethan said, his voice warm. "How's your mom?" "Still sleeping. I think she's better." Ethan nodded and set 2 paper cups on the small table, coffee for Grace, cocoa for Noah. The boy's eyes widened. "You remembered?" "I make a habit of listening," Ethan said, pulling up a chair. Grace stirred at the sound of voices. When she sat up, sunlight brushed over her hair, and for the first time Ethan saw color in her cheeks. "You didn't have to bring breakfast," she murmured, embarrassed. "It's just coffee," he said, "and it's the least I could do for the guardian of the snow globe." Her lips curved faintly. "You really like that metaphor, don't you?" He smiled. "Maybe I need it more than you do." As they ate, Noah hummed quietly, turning the snow globe over in his hands again and again. Grace watched him, then looked toward Ethan. "You said yesterday you'd fix things." Ethan hesitated. "I want to help you rebuild, but I also need to tell you something first." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Something more than being the man who shut down my life's work?" He winced. "That's exactly it. I didn't know what it meant to you, what it cost. We were cutting costs to fund a drone line I thought would save more lives, but I see now what we broke in the process." Grace sighed, her expression softening just a fraction. "At the time, it felt personal, like a door slammed in my face." "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "If I'd read beyond the spreadsheets, I might have understood what I was really ending." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, gulls wheeled over the gray water, their cries sharp against the morning air. Finally, Grace said, "You can't fix the past, Ethan, but maybe you can make what you build next mean something." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I can." Noah's voice broke the tension. "Can we go outside, please?" Grace glanced toward the window. The sidewalks were still covered in frost, but sunlight shimmered off the bay. "Bundle up," she said, smiling. 10 minutes. They walked along the waterfront together. The air smelled faintly of salt and snowmelt. Ethan carried a small paper bag of muffins. Noah darted ahead, his laughter echoing off the railings. Grace tugged her coat tighter. "He hasn't laughed like that in months," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "That sounds better than any stock ticker." She looked at him, curious. "You talk like a man who's starting to hate his empire." "Maybe just seeing it differently," he said. "I built a neurosentry to stop people from dying in storms, but somewhere along the line, I forgot storms aren't just weather. They're circumstances." Grace stopped walking. "You mean people like me?" He met her gaze. "Yes, people like you." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind caught her hair, sweeping it across her face. She brushed it aside and said quietly, "I don't know what you want from us, Ethan." "Nothing," he said. "Maybe just a chance to do something right for once without it being a press release." Her expression softened. "You already did. You stopped." That afternoon, Ethan returned to his office in downtown Seattle for the first time since the storm. From the glass tower's top floor, he could see the bay glittering, ice breaking in the sunlight. His assistant, Julia, rushed in. "Ethan, the board's been calling non-stop. They heard about the rescue. Press wants a statement." "Tell them no statement," he said, loosening his tie. "Sir, that story could boost our image." He looked at her. "I'm not interested in image right now." Julia blinked, surprised. She'd never seen him like this. Hair still damp from snow, eyes softer than she remembered. "Understood," she said quietly and slipped out. And alone again, Ethan turned to the window. In the distance, faint through the city haze, he could almost see the hotel roof where Grace and Noah stayed. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Sharp suit, weary eyes, a man who could fix any system except himself. He opened a new memo. Warm Line Initiative, Winter Aid for Single Parents. He typed 3 more words beneath it. Start tonight, quietly. Later, as the sun dipped behind the Olympic Mountains, the sky flared gold across the frozen bay. Down in that hotel room, Grace tucked Noah into bed. The repaired snow globe glimmered on the nightstand. When she turned off the lamp, the soft light from the city outside traced her face in silver. She thought of Ethan's voice, the sincerity behind his apology, the weariness behind his calm. For the first time, she believed him. Outside, on the street below, Ethan's car idled for a moment before driving away. He didn't look back, but he didn't need to, because in one small, frost-covered hotel room, something he hadn't felt in years had taken root again: hope. By the following evening, Seattle was shrouded again in cold mist. The storm had passed, but the city hadn't thawed. The bay was a sheet of dull silver, and the streets glistened with melted snow. Inside a corner cafe near the hospital, Ethan sat at a table by the window, laptop open, though the screen had long gone idle. He wasn't reading emails, he was waiting. Grace arrived in a gray coat that hung loosely around her frame, her hair still damp from drizzle. Noah trotted beside her, holding the snow globe tucked in both hands like something sacred. Ethan stood as they entered. "You didn't have to come," he said, smiling. "You said breakfast. It's dinner, but it counts," she replied with quiet humor. They ordered soup and grilled cheese. Simple, warm food. Grace ate slowly, still looking fragile but stronger. Ethan watched them across the table, how Noah dipped his sandwich into his soup, how Grace's eyes softened when she looked at him, and realized he hadn't shared a meal that wasn't a business function in years. When Noah ran to the counter to pick a cookie, Grace leaned forward. "He likes you," she said softly. "He doesn't trust easily." "Neither do you," Ethan said. Her mouth curved faintly. "You're not wrong." She studied him, eyes tracing his suit, his expensive watch. "You could have dropped us off and never looked back. Why stay involved?" He hesitated. "Maybe because I don't know how to look away anymore. I've spent years building systems that predict risk, that save data, not people. Last week that felt like leadership. Now it feels like distance." She tilted her head. "And now?" "Now," he said quietly, "I think maybe I want to build something that keeps people warm instead of just alive." Grace looked down at her cup, then back up. "You can't undo what's already done, Ethan." "I know," he said, "but I can try to make what comes next count." Noah returned, proudly clutching a napkin with 2 chocolate chip cookies. "They gave me 1 extra," he said, "for my mom." Grace smiled, breaking the cookie in half and sliding 1 piece toward Ethan. "And for our rescuer." He hesitated, then took it. "Then I guess I'm officially part of the team." Later, when they walked out into the crisp night, the streetlights reflected off puddles, turning everything into soft pools of amber. Grace pulled Noah's hood tight, and Ethan carried the leftover coffee cups to the trash. "You should rest," he said as they reached the hotel door. "I will," she said. "You don't have to check on us anymore, really." He nodded, but didn't promise. The next morning, as Grace packed their things, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a woman in a professional jacket, mid-30s, kind smile. "Good morning, Ms. Miller," she said. "I'm with the City Shelter Network. Mr. Voss contacted us. We can extend temporary housing for the next month, no charge." Grace froze. "He did what?" "He requested confidentiality." But he's covering it through a foundation. Said you'd want stability before deciding anything long-term. Grace closed the door gently after the woman left, her hands trembling. She turned to find Noah holding up the snow globe. "See? It's working, Mom. We're home again." Her throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. "Maybe we are." That night, Grace sat by the hotel window after Noah had fallen asleep. Outside, snow drifted lightly again, a softer kind, flakes that melted as soon as they touched glass. She opened her laptop, which she hadn't used in months. The screen blinked to life, and with it, a memory. The last presentation she'd ever built before her lab shut down. Neural mapping for trauma stabilization. On impulse, she opened the file and started editing. Her fingers moved cautiously at first, then faster, guided by the same instinct she'd buried under survival. For the first time since she'd lost her job, she felt like herself again. When her phone buzzed, she hesitated before answering. Ethan's voice was calm but warm. "Couldn't sleep either?" She smiled. "You could say that. I'm rebuilding something I used to love." He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Send it to me when you're ready." "I'm not doing this for you, Ethan," she said. "I know, but maybe I can help you make sure it lasts this time." After they hung up, Grace looked at Noah sleeping beside the mended snow globe. The crack still caught the light, faint but beautiful, like proof that even broken things could shine. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan stood by his office window overlooking the dark skyline. On his desk glowed a new prototype, a small portable heater shaped like a lantern. Inside, a core flickered faintly blue. The nameplate read, "Project Warmline, Prototype 1." He turned off the lights, leaving only that soft glow behind. Tomorrow, he'd start rewriting his company's mission from the inside out. But tonight, he let himself watch the snowfall, thinking not of losses, but of beginnings. Ethan's office was unusually quiet the next morning. The storm had thinned traffic, and most of NeuroSentry's executive floor was empty except for the hum of servers and the low tick of a wall clock. The city below gleamed faintly under sheets of melting frost. He stood by the window, coffee untouched, staring at the streets that stretched toward the waterfront. He could almost picture Grace and Noah down there somewhere, walking along the pier, sunlight reflecting off the snow globe the boy refused to let go of. He'd spent half the night reading the file she'd sent, her old neural mapping proposal. The system she'd helped design could have changed rehabilitation for trauma survivors, if it hadn't been axed to save costs during his merger. Her data was brilliant, clear, empathetic. It looked nothing like the cold numbers his board prized. A knock broke his thoughts. Julia, his assistant, stepped in, tablet in hand. "The board's waiting in Conference B. They're asking about last night's reports." Ethan sighed. "Of course they are." Julia hesitated. "You should know, they're worried. About you." He glanced over. "Worried? You've canceled 2 investor calls, donated $250,000 through a private foundation, and redirected development funds into something called Warmline. They think you're distracted." He gave a dry laugh. "They might be right." Julia studied him. "Is this about the woman and the kid?" He didn't answer directly. "It's about purpose," he said, taking his coat. "They forgot why we started this company. Maybe I did too." The boardroom was sleek and sterile, frosted glass, polished chrome, 10 men and women in tailored suits. As Ethan entered, a low murmur settled into silence. "Ethan," said a gray-haired board member, Richard Hale, the oldest and most skeptical voice at the table. "Good to see you finally in one piece. The press reports say you pulled 2 people from a snowstorm. Admirable. But let's talk business." "Always," Ethan said calmly. "We've noticed unusual expenditures," Hale continued. "Hotel payments, medical bills, a large anonymous foundation transfer, all traced back to company accounts. Are you aware of this?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I approved them." A ripple of whispers. Hale's brow furrowed. "Ethan, NeuroSentry is not a charity. Our investors expect profit," Ethan cut in. I know, but profit doesn't mean anything if the people we built this for are freezing outside while we measure margins. Are you suggesting we turn into a social program? Another member asked, incredulous. I'm suggesting, Ethan said evenly, that saving lives and saving dignity aren't opposites. Warmline isn't charity. It's technology that puts heat where infrastructure can't. Low-cost AI thermal systems for emergency shelters and mobile clinics. We have the tools. We've just never used them for anyone who couldn't afford the premium. The room fell silent. Even Hale looked momentarily thrown. And this decision, Hale said finally, was inspired by what? A random act of heroism? Ethan leaned forward, hands flat on the table. By realizing that somewhere out there the people we overlook are the ones who believed in us first. We don't build systems. We build second chances. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Julia, who'd quietly taken a seat along the wall, said softly, He's right. Heads turned. She met Ethan's eyes. You always said Neurocentry was about humanity meeting technology halfway. Maybe this is what that looks like. Ethan nodded to her, grateful. After the meeting, Hale caught him in the hallway. You're risking your career on sentiment, he warned. Maybe, Ethan said, but it's the first risk that feels worth taking. That night, back at the hotel, Grace found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single business card embossed with the Neurocentry logo and a handwritten note in blue ink. Your research wasn't a loss. I want you to lead it again. Let's finish what we started, for the right reasons this time. E.V. Her breath caught. For a moment she just stood there, the city lights glowing behind her through the curtain. Then Noah appeared beside her, rubbing his eyes. Is it from Mr. Ethan? She nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. Does that mean he's coming back? She smiled faintly. I think it means he never really left. Across town, Ethan sat alone in his office. The prototype heater glowing soft blue on his desk. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then typed, Ethan. Still awake? A moment later, her reply blinked across the screen. Grace. Barely. Noah's out cold. But I read your note. Ethan. Then you know I mean it. Grace. I do. But don't do this out of guilt. Ethan. It's not guilt. It's clarity. There was a pause. Then she wrote, Grace. Clarity can be a dangerous thing. He smiled to himself, typing back, Ethan. So can honesty. For a while, neither of them sent another message. Outside, snow began to fall again, light, hesitant flakes that melted on contact. But the city didn't feel cold anymore. Grace placed the snow globe on the windowsill and whispered to herself, He's changing. In his office, watching the same quiet snow, Ethan whispered the same thing. The next week passed in a blur of gray mornings and slow thawing days. The city was recovering from the storm, but inside Ethan Voss's world, something else was unraveling and rebuilding at the same time. He spent his days at Neurocentry rewriting mission briefs, fielding calls from partners who didn't yet understand why the company's once invisible CEO was suddenly visiting homeless shelters and winter clinics in person. Every night, he returned to the small hotel on the waterfront. He didn't plan to, but he always found himself there, checking in just to drop something off. A bag of groceries, a new jacket for Noah, or extra batteries for Grace's old laptop. On the third night, Grace finally called him on it. You know you can just visit, right? She said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. You don't have to keep pretending you forgot something. Ethan looked caught, one hand still holding a grocery bag. I was making sure you're both okay. Her eyes softened despite the teasing. We are, thanks to you. Noah peeked out from behind her. Did you bring the wire thing? Ethan grinned and knelt, pulling out a small box. Right here. You ready to build your first mini-heater? The boy's face lit up. Yeah! Grace shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You too, and your gadgets." They cleared the small table near the window, and Ethan began to show Noah how to coil copper wire around a small battery pack. Grace watched as he explained each step with the patience of someone used to teaching interns, not children. "See this?" he said, holding up the small glowing diode once they connected the circuit. "Heat starts from the center. It spreads out, but it only works if everything's connected. If one wire's loose, the heat dies," Noah said quickly, nodding. Ethan smiled. "Exactly. That's how people work too." Grace folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "That's surprisingly philosophical for an engineer." He looked up at her. "Maybe I'm learning." When the device warmed to life, Noah cupped his hands over it. "It's warm," he said. "Mom, look." Grace knelt beside him. The soft glow reflected in both their faces, making the moment feel almost sacred. Ethan sat back, watching them. He hadn't realized how much he missed this. Simple warmth shared without pretense, without data points or reports. Just connection. When Noah finally fell asleep, Grace stood by the window, the city lights reflected in her eyes. "He hasn't smiled like that since before we lost our house," she said quietly. Ethan joined her. "He's a resilient kid. Gets that from you." Grace turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Why do I feel like you're trying to fix more than just us?" He exhaled. "Because maybe I am." She studied him, then said softly, "Ethan, I'm grateful, but I don't want to be a project. I need to stand on my own again." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I don't want to take that from you." "But," he hesitated, "but I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about what happens when you do stand on your own, and if I'll still be part of that picture." The silence between them thickened. Grace looked out the window again, snow drifting lazily over the harbor. "You barely know us," she said. "I know what I see," Ethan said quietly. "A woman who refused to give up when the world froze her out. A boy who believes in magic because his mother taught him hope wasn't a lie. I know that's more real than anything I've built in a boardroom." Her voice softened. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He smiled faintly, maybe remembering I'm human. The moment lingered. Then she said gently, "If you keep this up, your shareholders are going to mutiny." "Then they'll have to get in line," he said, half laughing. "The board already tried." Grace's eyes widened. "You told them about Warmline?" He nodded. "Told them it's our future. Half of them think I've lost it." "And have you?" He looked down, smiling to himself. "Maybe, but if I have, it's the best kind of lost." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, the city glow haloing her in silver, her hair a soft frame around her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You're a good man, Ethan Voss. Maybe too good for the world you built." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't good, that guilt and loneliness had driven him more than virtue. But before he could, Noah stirred on the bed, mumbling in his sleep. Grace went to him, tucking the blanket higher. Ethan lingered by the door, watching her. Then he said, "I'll come by tomorrow. There's something I want to show you both." "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, then smiled. A new kind of warmth. She arched a brow. "You sound like a salesman again." He chuckled. "Maybe, but this time, I'm selling something real." When he left, the cold air outside bit at his face, but it felt sharper, cleaner, almost alive. He looked up at the snow swirling under the streetlight and thought of the way Grace had said his name earlier. Soft, but sure. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a chart or a forecast. It felt like possibility. 2 mornings later, the sky over Seattle burned pale gold through layers of mist, and the news cycle that usually followed Ethan Voss had finally caught up to him. By the time he stepped out of his building, reporters were waiting, their breath steaming in the cold. "Mr. Voss, is it true you've been funding private shelters under company accounts? Are you leaving Neurosentry? Who's the woman seen with you in Redmond?" He didn't answer. He just pushed through the cameras, coat collar turned up, jaw tight. He'd always been good at silence. Now it was his shield. Upstairs, the boardroom was in chaos. His CFO, Dana Corrigan, stood at the head of the table, voice sharp. "We've got tabloids suggesting our CEO is living with an unknown woman and child in a hotel. Investors are nervous. Ethan, please tell me this is an exaggeration." Ethan set down his briefcase. "If you're asking whether I've been helping a family recover after our company's negligence, no, it's not an exaggeration." Dana's tone hardened. "Do you understand what that sounds like? You're the face of a billion-dollar tech firm. You can't just vanish into some charity romance story and expect Wall Street to applaud." He met her eyes evenly. "I'm not asking for applause." One of the older board members sighed. "Ethan, we admire your conscience, but the media's spinning this as scandal. A CEO's secret family in hiding? Come on, this could sink our stock before the quarter's out." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then maybe our investors should find a company that values profit more than people. I won't apologize for being seen with someone who reminds me why we started this in the first place." Dana leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You're risking everything." He didn't blink. Then everything needed risking. The room fell silent. When he left the meeting, he didn't take the elevator to his office. He walked straight out of the building into the thin sunlight and drove toward the waterfront. Grace and Noah were waiting in the small hotel lobby, backpacks beside them. She looked worried, newspaper folded tightly in her hands. CEO Ethan Voss's Secret Life, Mystery Woman and Child. Linked to billionaire humanitarian. "I didn't want this," she said as soon as he entered. "I know," he said quietly. "Neither did I." Noah's eyes darted between them. "Are you in trouble, Mr. Ethan?" Ethan crouched to meet his gaze. "Sometimes doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable, but we'll be okay." Grace glanced at the window, where a handful of reporters lingered across the street. "We can't stay here," she murmured. "I know." He hesitated before adding, "I have somewhere safe, a cabin outside the city. Quiet, no press. You can stay until this passes." She looked at him warily. "You mean your cabin?" He nodded. "It's been empty for years. Maybe it's time it had a purpose again." Grace studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. "All right, but only because Noah can't handle another hotel lobby full of cameras." Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Does your cabin have snow?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Plenty, you'll see." They drove north for nearly 2 hours, winding through pine-lined roads until the skyline gave way to quiet wilderness. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, its roof heavy with snow, smoke curling faintly from a chimney Ethan hadn't lit in years. When they stepped inside, the air was cold but clean, scented faintly of cedar and dust. Grace looked around at the polished wooden walls, the books still neatly lined on shelves, the black and white photos of a younger Ethan with his parents, 2 faces long gone. "You used to come here a lot?" she asked. "Not since my son died," he said softly. Her breath caught. "Ethan." "He was 8, he said simply. "Snowstorm. The sensors failed. It's why I built Neurosentry. I thought if I made the world predictable, I could stop the pain from happening again." Grace stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You can't engineer away loss." "I know," he said. "But you and Noah, you reminded me life isn't something you can code, either." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her eyes. "Then let's try living it, at least for tonight." That evening, they lit a fire. Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, turning the snow globe in his hands, watching the flakes dance in the firelight. "Mom," he said softly, "it's not cracked anymore." Grace smiled, brushing his hair. "That's because someone fixed it." Ethan watched them from the couch, the flames painting gold on Grace's face. "Maybe," he said quietly. "It fixed us all a little." When Noah fell asleep near the fire, Grace stayed by the window, watching snow drift across the lake. Ethan joined her, their reflections merging faintly in the glass. "They'll still come after you," she said. "The press, the board." He nodded. "Let them. I spent too many years protecting an image that didn't mean anything. Maybe it's time I protect something real." She turned toward him. "Like what?" He smiled faintly. "Like this." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, honest. Outside, the snow kept falling, steady and quiet, covering every footprint from the path that led to the door, as if the world had decided to give them one night of peace before the next storm. The next storm arrived 2 nights later. It rolled down from the Cascades like an army of ghosts, swallowing the lake in white. The wind howled through the trees, bending them until their branches creaked. Ethan had been monitoring the forecast all day from his laptop, his own neurosentry sensors showing red zones across the region. But by the time he realized how bad it would get, the roads were already closing. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting a soft glow on Grace and Noah curled up on the couch. The generator hummed faintly outside, powered by a backup unit Ethan had installed years ago, when isolation had been a comfort, not a risk. Grace looked up from her blanket as he came in from the porch, brushing snow from his shoulders. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" He nodded. "Power's flickering across the grid. If it drops completely, we'll be running on the generator alone." Noah looked up sleepily. "We'll be okay, right?" Ethan smiled faintly, ruffling the boy's hair. "We'll be okay. I promise." Grace studied him. "You're calm for a man who just said the grid's failing." He sat beside her, warming his hands over the fire. "I've spent half my life trying to predict storms. It's strange, being inside one and realizing not everything can be controlled." For a while, they sat in quiet, listening to the wind drum against the walls. The fire snapped and crackled, filling the room with orange light. Then, a sudden gust roared outside, and the lamps flickered once, twice, and went dark. The silence afterward was sharp. Ethan grabbed the lantern from the counter, flicked it on, and checked the panel by the door. "Generator's fine. We'll keep the heat running, but stay close to the fire just in case." Grace nodded, wrapping Noah tighter in the blanket. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just another snow night." But Ethan saw it, the paleness creeping into Noah's face, the way his small chest rose unevenly. "Grace," he said quietly, crouching beside them. "When was the last time he ate?" She frowned. "Dinner, but he was tired. Didn't finish much." "Feel his forehead." Her hand trembled as she touched him. "He's burning up." Ethan was already moving. He grabbed his coat and reached for the small med kit he'd brought from the city. "He's got a fever. Could be flu, maybe exposure from before. He needs a hospital." Grace stood, panic in her voice. "We can't drive in this. The road's closed." "Then I'll walk if I have to." She grabbed his arm. "You can't go out there, Ethan. You'll freeze." He looked at Noah, the boy shivering despite the blankets. "He's 6, Grace. His body won't hold out another night like this." Snow slammed against the windows, relentless. The cabin felt smaller with every gust. Grace's breath caught. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "You won't," Ethan said, already pulling his boots on. "Keep him near the fire. I'll get the car as far as it can go." She grabbed his hand before he reached the door. "Ethan, please." He looked back, meeting her eyes in the dim light. "I've already lost one child in a storm. I won't lose another." The wind nearly ripped the door from its hinges as he stepped outside. Snow swallowed him immediately, stinging his face like shards of glass. The SUV was half buried. He dug with his arms, cleared the windshield, and coaxed the engine alive. When it roared to life, he sprinted back inside. "Come on!" he shouted over the wind. Grace lifted Noah into her arms, the boy limp and hot with fever. They bundled him in blankets and hurried into the car. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the wheel, headlights cutting tunnels through the whiteout. The drive was hell. The road curved along the lake, edges invisible beneath snow. Twice, the car fishtailed, tires spinning on ice. Grace held Noah close, whispering prayers between sobs. "Hold on, buddy," Ethan murmured, teeth clenched. "Stay with me." He didn't see the downed branch until it was too late. The SUV skidded, jolted hard, and stopped just short of the embankment. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. "Ethan?" Grace's voice was small, terrified. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. "Battery's frozen. We're on foot." Grace's eyes widened. "In this?" He reached for Noah, lifting him carefully. "I'll carry him. The hospital's 2 miles down. I can make it." "You'll collapse." "Then I'll crawl," he said. I promised him he'd be okay. Snow whipped around them as they stepped out, the cold a living thing. Ethan bent his head against the wind, his arms locked around Noah's small body, his coat wrapped tight around them both. Grace stumbled beside him, holding the lantern high. Each step was agony. Snow up to their knees. Wind slicing through layers of fabric. The boy's weight grew heavier as his breathing slowed. "Talk to him," Ethan shouted. "Keep him awake." Grace's voice cracked. "Noah, sweetheart, stay with us. Remember the cabin in your globe? We're almost there, baby." The boy whimpered faintly, his voice barely audible. "Don't let me go." Ethan's heart clenched. "Never," he said through chattering teeth. "You hear me? Never." The storm howled, but he kept moving, every muscle screaming, his breath ragged. Snow coated his lashes, his hair, his shoulders. Grace stumbled once, fell to her knees, and he grabbed her hand without slowing. Ahead, faint through the white, a light glowed, the red flicker of the hospital sign. Ethan's legs nearly gave out with relief. He tightened his hold on Noah, forcing his body forward through the last 100 feet. When they reached the doors, staff burst out to meet them, shouting orders, pulling the boy from his arms. Inside, the heat hit him like a wave. His knees buckled. Grace caught his arm as he swayed, her own face streaked with tears and melted snow. "You saved him," she whispered, voice breaking. Ethan's lips were blue, his voice hoarse. "No. He saved me first." The nurses rushed Noah down the hall. Grace turned back, gripping Ethan's coat, her forehead pressed to his chest. He wrapped his trembling arms around her, snow melting between them. Outside, the storm screamed, but inside, they'd made it through. Morning broke slowly over the city, pale light crawling across the hospital windows like a truce after war. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving the streets buried in silence and drifts of white. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and coffee. Familiar, steady, mercifully warm. Ethan Voss woke to that warmth. His coat had been draped over his shoulders, his hands wrapped in heated packs, his clothes still damp from the storm. Someone had settled him in a chair outside the recovery ward. For a moment he didn't know where he was, until he heard the faint, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. He sat up fast. "Noah?" A nurse nearby looked up from her chart. "He's stable," she said softly. "Fever's breaking. He's a strong kid." The words hit like sunlight. He exhaled, long and shaky, the tension draining from his body. His throat burned raw from the cold. His muscles ached, but he'd never felt so alive. Grace appeared in the doorway moments later, her hair tied loosely back, her eyes red but shining. She wore the hospital's borrowed sweater, sleeves too long, cuffs damp from tears. When she saw him awake, she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and dropped to her knees in front of him. "You carried him through a blizzard," she whispered. "You should be in a bed yourself." Ethan gave a tired smile. Didn't seem right to rest before he did. "You could have died," she said, voice trembling. He met her eyes, steady and quiet. So could he. For a moment neither of them spoke. The hum of machines filled the silence, a reminder of how fragile everything was and how close they'd come to losing it. Finally, Grace stood and pulled him gently to his feet. "Come on. He's been asking for you." When they entered Noah's room, the boy was propped up against his pillows. Cheeks flushed, but eyes bright again. He clutched the snow globe in his lap. Someone, maybe a nurse, had cleaned the glass until it gleamed. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said, his voice softer than he intended. "You gave us a scare." Noah smiled sleepily. "You kept me warm," he said. Grace brushed a hand through her son's hair. "He wouldn't let go of your coat all night. The doctors had to promise they'd give it back." Ethan chuckled, pulling up a chair. "Guess I'll have to order a replacement." "No," Noah said seriously. "Keep it. It's lucky now." Grace laughed softly through a breath that was half a sob. A doctor entered then, clipboard in hand. "He's improving faster than expected," she said. "You'll both be ready to go in a couple of days. Whoever carried him here probably saved his life." Grace turned to Ethan, eyes shining. "He did." The doctor smiled. "Then we owe you, Mr. Voss." After she left, Grace sat beside the bed and looked at Ethan for a long time. "I don't think I can ever repay you," she said. He shook his head. "You already did." "How?" "By reminding me what life feels like when it's not run by quarterly reports." She looked at him, something breaking open in her expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. "You talk like someone who's finally found what he was looking for." He gave a small smile. "Maybe I have." Outside the window, the storm's aftermath sparkled under the sun, branches heavy with frost, rooftops glittering like silver, the world newly washed. Noah turned the snow globe over in his hands. "It's not broken anymore," he said softly. Ethan leaned closer. "You sure?" The boy nodded, holding it up. Inside, the cabin stood surrounded by swirling flakes, but the crack in the glass had been sealed so cleanly it looked almost deliberate, a scar turned into design. "It's perfect now," Noah said. Grace smiled, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. Ethan watched them. The boy's smile, the way Grace's fingers lingered protectively, the way the morning light brushed across both their faces, and he felt something he hadn't known he was missing. Belonging. For years, he'd lived behind walls of glass and steel, surrounded by people who quoted his brilliance but never looked him in the eye. Now, here in a hospital room with a boy and his mother, he finally understood what he'd been building toward all along. Not success, but connection. Grace stood, reaching for her coat. "The nurses said there's a courtyard out back. He wants to see the snow." Ethan helped Noah into his boots, then wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Together they stepped outside, the air sharp and crystalline. The hospital courtyard was quiet, untouched snow covering the benches. Noah laughed when the first sunlight hit the snow globe, scattering rainbows across the ice. "Look, Mr. Ethan, it's just like in here," he said, shaking it gently. Ethan knelt beside him. "Yeah," he murmured, "you made the world match your globe." Grace looked down at them, smiling through tears. "He couldn't have done it without you." Ethan glanced up. "No, I think we all saved each other." They stood there for a long time, the three of them framed by sunlight and snow, the air crisp and still. Later, back inside, Grace tucked Noah back into bed. She turned to Ethan, her eyes soft. "You know, I used to think my life ended when that lab shut down, but maybe it was just waiting to begin again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Then maybe this is the next step." She unfolded it, his letter of offer, written by hand, not printed. Project Warmline, Director of Field Research, to build warmth where the world forgets it. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. "Ethan, I don't—" He smiled gently. "You already earned it." Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was steady. "You really don't know how to stop saving people, do you? Maybe I finally found the right ones to start with." Outside, sunlight glittered off the snow, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the cold at all. 3 months later, spring crept back to Seattle. The ice on the lake had melted into glassy water, and the city, once buried under storms, breathed again. Tulips bloomed along the sidewalks. The air was warmer, but Ethan still caught himself scanning the sky out of habit, watching for weather shifts. This time, though, the storms he monitored weren't just numbers on a screen. They were stories, lives, families. At the downtown Civic Center, a crowd gathered beneath a banner that read, "The Warmline Foundation, launching a future built on compassion." Reporters filled the front rows, cameras ready. But this wasn't like any event Ethan Voss had ever led. No red carpets, no executives in polished suits, just city workers, teachers, single parents, and volunteers, people whose hands had known real cold. Grace stood near the stage, wearing a simple navy dress and the hospital bracelet she refused to cut until this day. Noah clutched the mended snow globe in both hands, spinning it slowly so the light caught inside. When Ethan stepped up to the microphone, he looked different from the man who once hid behind glass towers. His hair was a little longer, his tie slightly loosened. The sharpness in his voice had softened into something steadier, grounded. He looked out over the crowd. 3 months ago, he began, I drove into a snowstorm thinking I could control it. I believed that technology could predict anything, that if I worked hard enough, no one would ever suffer what I had. A hush fell over the audience. Grace's eyes lifted toward him. "But I was wrong," he continued. "Storms don't care about algorithms. They find us anyway, and sometimes all we can do is find each other." He paused, his gaze landing on Grace and Noah. "That night, I learned that the warmth we build doesn't come from machines. It comes from moments. When a stranger stops, when a mother refuses to give up, when a child believes the world is still good." He gestured toward the logo projected behind him, a simple image of a small, glowing lantern surrounded by snowflakes. The Warmline Foundation. "This program," he said, "isn't about profit. It's about promise. Our team will install low-cost AI heat systems in shelters across the Pacific Northwest. We'll provide emergency housing for single parents. And every year, we'll fund new community engineers, because innovation should belong to everyone." Applause filled the room, but he lifted a hand to quiet it. "There's someone here who reminded me of what purpose really means." He nodded toward the side of the stage. "Grace Miller, please join me." Grace froze for a second, startled. Then, as the audience clapped encouragement, she climbed the steps. Ethan met her halfway, offering his hand. She smiled nervously. "You could have warned me." "Would you have come up?" "Probably not." "Then it worked," he said, smiling. He turned back to the crowd. "Grace Miller was part of a neural mapping project years ago that my company, my decision, shut down. I didn't see the cost then, but she turned that loss into something extraordinary. She's the new Director of Field Research for Warmline, and she's going to lead our first pilot center right here in Seattle." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Grace blinked back tears, her hand tightening around the microphone. "I don't have much to add," she said softly, voice trembling. "Except this. Survival isn't luck. It's kindness. It's one person refusing to walk away. If we can build a world that remembers that, maybe the cold won't feel so endless." The crowd rose to its feet. Noah, sitting in the front row, stood too, holding the snow globe high. "Look, Mom, it's snowing in here again," he shouted, shaking it. Laughter rippled through the hall. Ethan stepped closer to Grace, his voice low so only she could hear. "He's right. It is snowing." She turned toward him, eyes bright with something deeper than gratitude. "You know, for a man who used to measure everything in numbers, you've learned a lot about heart." He smiled. "I had good teachers." As the applause continued, Grace slipped her hand into his. The gesture was small, unannounced, but it steadied them both. Outside the Civic Center, the snow that had lingered for months finally began to melt, dripping from the rooftops into silver puddles. A soft breeze carried the scent of wet earth and possibility. When the ceremony ended, Ethan walked out onto the steps, the sun warm on his face. Grace and Noah joined him, the boy spinning the snow globe in the light until the flakes shimmered gold. Ethan crouched down. "Keep that safe, Noah. It started all this." Noah grinned. "Grandma said it keeps home inside, but I think home's not in there anymore." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "No?" The boy shook his head, tapping his chest. "It's here now." Grace smiled through tears. "He's right." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then I guess that's where mine is, too." The three of them stood together on the steps, framed by sunlight and the slow drip of melting ice. Behind them, the banner fluttered in the wind. Warm line, because some warmth can't be engineered. Ethan looked up at the sky, a soft blue now free of clouds, and felt the quiet weight of something he hadn't believed in for years. Peace. "Some technologies keep us alive," he said to Grace, his voice barely above a whisper. "But kindness keeps us human." She smiled, slipping her hand back into his. And as the last of the snow melted around their feet, Ethan Voss realized that for the first time since he could remember, he wasn't chasing warmth. He was standing in it.